Another episode of Experts in the Spotlight. I'm Tammy Alvarez, the CWC founder, and we inspire business leaders to make a big impact and love every Monday again. Today, I've got one of my favorite people on the planet, Brian Montes, here to help me think through and help you think through how to downsize with dignity. So, Brian, thanks for coming. I appreciate you joining my conversation today.
Tammy, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me on again.
Again, right? Total fangirl, not gonna lie. All right, so we've been talking about how to downsize with dignity. You know, with this downsizing season that we're in, you hear all of these horror stories. I mean, I've had managers who have literally had to fire people en masse in a conference room. Right. I've had remote employees that are, clients of ours get fired over email because they're not in the office. All of these things. And there's just the shenanigans and just the bad actors with good intentions are everywhere. And I have been on a tear, and I will continue to be on a tear, that we can do this in a dignified way. And I know you advise a lot of companies in terms of how to grow, how to shrink when they have to, and really ultimately how to become, maintain their viability. And so what are you seeing in the market right now? And what have you seen this year in terms of the headwinds companies are facing and what the thought process is in, the executive and management teams?
Great question. So what I'm seeing currently today is across all different industries, whether it's food manufacturing, whether it's consulting, right? There's been a bit of a slowdown. So, and it's typically because their customers are starting to slow down, right? Their buying is slowing down. They're not purchasing as much. So there is a domino effect that is starting to happen. And from that, as companies start to look at their payroll against their gross sales, they start to realize that as those sales come down, their payroll cost continues to climb. It's inverse. And so, they start to think about, how do I trim? And some leaders get very innovative. They take pay cuts themselves, right? There's a mindset to doing what there's a mindset or a thought process to doing, what can I do? If we can weather the storm, what can I do? Or what can my C-suite do to not have to lay anybody off, right? And I've seen some C-suites take pay cuts in an effort to make sure that they don't have to lay off. So those are some of the neat things that I get to see out there. But then there's the other side of it where it's very black and white, and it's like sales are slowing, payroll's getting too expensive against our gross sales. We're going to start trimming headcount, and it's a very methodical, or there's no feeling to it, right? It's very black and white. We're going to start laying off, and we're going to start getting our numbers back in line. So, but I am starting to see it across a lot of different industries.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. I was talking to one of my colleagues who works in the legal industry. And she's a, consultant in that space. And believe it or not, they're even starting to slow down because they serve the VC community. Mm-hmm. So that's starting to temper a little bit. And so it's just really interesting, the domino effect. And I don't think the tech sector gets so much press in terms of the layoffs, over the past 12 months. But when we think about the ecosystem in its totality, there's just significant knock-on effect. Mm-hmm. And I think the best way to navigate a risk as an owner or a CEO is to prevent it, right? So let's try not to get here in the first place. And so what are some of your advice in terms of just getting ahead of this so you don't have to make those difficult decisions?
Another really good question and point, and obviously sometimes there's some black swan events that occur that are out of all of our control, right? This COVID pandemic that happened a few years ago, black swan event. We saw it kind of coming,
right? So yeah.
But other than the black swan events, from a proactive standpoint, it really boils down to being very strategic with your talent strategy plan, right? So companies tend to get themselves in trouble when they don't have a talent strategy plan flushed out that allows them to look at how well their team is performing, how much is revenue by employee, clearly define who's responsible for what. And all of a sudden, when bottlenecks start to happen, instead of addressing the bottlenecks and refining the business to be more efficient with either, processes, softwares, standard operating procedures, training, things like that, they rush to hire. And that's where they start to get themselves in trouble, because instead of looking at all their options to make sure that their business continues to flow without taking that payroll and really ballooning it up, they rush to hire. And I've seen a lot of business owners and CEOs do this, where their fix is to hire instead of looking at all their options first. So now you start hiring and stacking on roles, and all of a sudden you have people that don't have enough work to keep them busy, and things start to slow down, and now you're in a cycle of having to lay off. So really looking at your options before hiring and being very clear on your talent strategy and making sure that when you do go to hire, that that position is either a newly created position that you haven't had before in your organization, or you have somebody that their workload is so intense that you have to now start splitting off the duties and creating a new role. So that's one way to really make sure that you don't get ahead of your, over your skis on your team and your payroll size.
Absolutely. And is there a recommendation in terms of, revenue per employee, or is that more dependent on the size of the organization, their industry? Like, what guidelines should executives be looking at?
Yeah, so obviously, we can always look at peer data and look at, for a consulting agency, what are other consulting agencies do. So all that benchmark data is out there per industry, and it does vary by industry you're in because some industries are more labor intensive than others. However, from a payroll versus gross sales standpoint, I remember I was working with one consulting firm last year, which is very labor intensive, but her payroll climbed to almost 85% of her gross sales. It's like, that's not sustainable. You are bloated, right? So we need to bring you down. We need to systematically bring you down. A, we need to increase sales.
Right. I
And
mean, that's
B,
the
yeah,
user to it, right? Like, it was
that's,
so more.
yeah, we need to rapidly increase sales, but we're probably also going to need to trim payroll just a little bit because we've got to get you down below 50% minimum, right? And some best practices for some industries are 40%. So it does vary. So you really do need to look at the industry you're in, get some benchmarks, and have your data.
Yeah, and data is one thing that I think a lot of people don't have.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of information, but we don't have a lot of data to make those good decisions.
Right.
And coming from big corporate, that was always a nightmare, right? As soon as you produced a metric, people would argue over where the data came from. And so depending on the size of the company that you're leading, that is absolutely key. I also personally, when I see that there's more demand in terms of labor than what we currently have, my first go-to is always contracting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's bring in the contractors. Let's get over this bubble. And if it's a sustained bubble, then I know it's time to back, to invest again.
Love that. Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that you can hedge before you get too big. And, it's a great preventative strategy to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's assume we did all we could in terms of preventative and the headwinds are still strong. Now, we don't go to full-on dumpster fire overnight.
No.
Except for those black swan events. So what are some of the early warning signs that business owners and leaders should look for to say, hang on a second, I need to really start to pay attention to this now?
So there's a few things that we need to be looking at because you're right. Getting to the point where all of a sudden you've got to start reducing in mass doesn't happen overnight. It builds up over time. So if you're ignoring it, obviously then it does become a crisis. So if you are actually paying attention and proactively managing your business, one of the areas that are looking at your financials regularly, right? I worked with a lot of business owners that don't look at their financials. So they have no idea what is my payroll against my gross sales? What is my revenue by employee? What are all of my costs? So they don't see it starting to creep up on them month over month. They also don't analyze their cash flow. They're not looking at their cash flow, cash on hand, and doing that, looking at that and saying, okay, if sales went, down 25%, I can survive this long on my current team payroll before I have to start making changes. So there's a real lack of strategic planning when it comes to the financials, the cash flow, the runway, the burn rate, all of that stuff that goes into running your business day to day. So that is one key thing. If you're not looking at your financials regularly, you're going to get caught off guard. And then number two, if you start seeing in your business, you start to know you have too much capacity when employees start having a lot of downtime. And I see that in food manufacturing, right? We have employees that maybe in the administrative side don't have enough to do.
Right.
And so that you have inefficiencies in your talent strategy because you have people that have a lot of time on their hands day in and day out within a 40-hour work week. So you're top heavy there if you cannot assign them more work where there's not tasks and things to beef them up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the other things that comes to mind for me, especially with the knock-on effect that we are talking about earlier, is being hyper aware of your receivables. Because if you may not be having cash flow problems and you may be like, okay, we're getting paid, net 30, net 60. And then all of a sudden, that net 30 goes to net 45 and that net 45 goes to, 60. So I think during times of economic strain, being overly diligent on your receivables as part of that cash flow management, and not assuming that what has always been will always continue to be.
Right, right.
Because then you're a victim of your client's distress. And that can put you in a bad spot in a really big way, depending on how you handle your cash flow and your receivables.
Absolutely. And it's all a domino effect, right? That starts happening. You start to see your top line sales are decreasing. If you have physical inventory, you watch your physical inventory start to rise, right? Your turns aren't as much. So there's a lot of factors in the business that really give us those clues early on, long before it's a dumpster fire.
Yeah. And the question is, do we look at them?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
do we know whether what we're seeing is good or bad compared to historical trends, right? I am very guilty in all of the things of not being a good parent over my financials as well. So I am
And
guilty.
not only do we look at them, do we act on them?
Right. Yes. And I knew that everyone who is, who follows me knows that money is my anxiety. Doesn't matter how much or how little I have. And so I know for me as an executive that this is not something, now that it's my own money. When I was in corporate, it was easy for me.
Mm,
Now that it's mine, I'm like, oh, hang on a second. There's a
yeah,
lot of junk to unpack here.
yeah.
And so I hired adult supervision.
And that's smart.
I have people who do this for me because I know I won't, but
And
I know
that's smart.
right? And that way, they force me to sit down once a month. They show me all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then at least, okay, the monsters and the dust bunnies are out from under the bed. Let's make a good decision as we continue to navigate.
Exactly. Now you can make informed decisions.
Yes, but if I was self-directed, there's no way that would happen in a minute, right? That's just
Well, like I said,
not
it's
where I
smart to know when to bring in help.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's assume, the company does that, right? So now they've done everything they can to prevent it. They know the early warning signs, headwinds continue to come at them, and now they have to take corrective action. What are some things that leaders should be considering when it does come time to make those difficult decisions?
There's really 4 areas for leaders to be looking at. First and foremost, transparency and the empathetic and compassionate communication, because I have news for you. Your employees already know what's going on. Whether you're in person or whether you're remote, there is that virtual or real water cooler, and it works.
Yes.
So I got news for you. Your employees already know what's happening because they're on the front lines. They see the slowdowns. They see what's going on. They know. So don't play hide the ball, because they have a sense, or they already know what's going on. So being very clear about what's happening, being transparent, this is where we're at, this is what's happening, because they have to continue to believe in the leadership. They have to believe that leadership is making the right decisions, right? That they're not in this mess because the leadership made stupid decisions, right? So you really need to sit down and have that transparent conversation with them and clear the air, because if you don't, the rumors are going to fly and human beings are going to make up their own ends to the story, and you're going to have a rumor mill that gets way out of control, which is going to get back to the customers. So really, that's the first step, is making sure that you control the narrative honestly.
And I think that's such a great point, because in the absence of data, people assume the worst, right? Always. No one ever assumes best case scenario on anything.
Right? No, we don't.
It's gonna be fine. We're getting fired. The company's going
yeah, bail, time to bail ship.
Yeah, exactly. Run. And so, but from that, like, I think a good point, especially for, let's say, less, executives that have a lower EQ, right? I mean, they're out there. Let's not pretend they're not, but you do care about what your customers hear. And you do care about your brand integrity. And so if you're not transparent up front, and this is in the corrective action. So this isn't even when you're doing RIFs yet. This is when you're doing things like stopping non-essential projects. When you freeze hiring.
Canceling travel trips.
Of course, right? Yep. And you can do that and pretend no one notices, or you can be like, listen, our revenue is in the tank. And we are working like hell to get this done.
Yeah.
And while we're doing that, we are moving these levers as well to try and prevent anything worse from happening to the organization. And if you can say that, then people know you've got skin in the game, right? And it's contained within.
Right. There's a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So step 1 is transparency. And for those of you who don't care about what your people think, you care about what your customers think. So it's good to do no matter what. And so what's step 2?
Then it really comes down to that advanced planning and preparation, right? Because if you start to see what's happening, then at that point, you want to sit down and go, okay, if we need to do some layoffs, what does that look like? Don't wait until all of a sudden you can't make payroll to do this. Sit down with the executive team, start the strategic planning. If we have to lay off, Where are we starting? What does it look like? What departments are impacted? What are our legal implications? Do we offer severance? Do we not offer severance? Right? What kind of training do we need to offer frontline managers to start dealing with potential layoffs and how they're going to deal with their departments? So really have that strategy planning session well in advance. If you never need to execute on it, great. But
Fantastic.
at least you've gone through the exercise and you're not waiting until the 12th hour to say, uh-oh, we got to do this and it's got to be executed by tomorrow.
Yes, and I love that. And I think by having that plan and good advisors, because
Mhm.
this is riddled with, all kinds of gremlins that can come bite us, is to try and find where is that equitable line?
Right,
Like, when does it, because there's so much confusion from a leadership perspective on who gets impacted.
right.
Right. And if you don't have a standard to apply, you're opening yourselves up for all kinds of trouble that you don't need to have.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times, and I hate to admit it, but I even see the leaders that I coach use it as a way to get rid of their poor performers instead of performing them out. Right.
Oh yeah, don't even get me started on that.
Right?
That's
Another rabbit hole, right?
oh.
But be able to take an objective look and say, okay, we're not firing anyone from sales. Because we still need them, right? But we do need to impact some of the administrative functions or some of the, if we've gotten a little heavy in our management, layer.
Mhm.
And so but I think the more you can be fair in terms of how, who makes it, who doesn't, versus using it as a quick out for bad leadership behavior, the better.
Agreed.
Yeah.
100%.
All right, number 3.
If you do have to move in that direction of starting to lay off, as an organization, do everything you can to support those affected employees, right? There's a lot of things we as employers can do to make this blow a little bit less painful. Regardless of what happens, it's going to hurt. You're impacting their life, you're impacting their family. No matter what, you can't take that away. But can you open up other opportunities with other companies for them, right? How can you help them land another job? Are there skills you can send them out for training for that will help them get into that next job? Can you hire resume writers to update their resume if they haven't done a while, or their LinkedIn profile, right? There's things we can do to help them try and make the transition just a little less painful, right? What kind of networks and referrals can we give them? So anything we can do to help that employee make the transition will not only help that employee and their family, but it's also good for your brand as an employer, right? Because you're showing some compassion as an employer that, hey, look, we got in this mess. We're trying to clear it up, and we're going to help you land your next opportunity, which will hopefully be better than this one.
And I think it was interesting because we did a CWC roundtable about this, which you guys either will see or have seen. And we were talking about like how to get this right. And it was towards the end of our recording. And I was sharing a story about probably one of the classiest moves I've ever seen was a CEO who had to impact, it was a significant amount of people. I mean, there's over 150 people that were impacted.
Wow.
He listed every single one of them and their LinkedIn, profile links, and that these guys are amazing. And, every company needs to hire them. And as I was talking, I was getting choked up and I started to cry. I'm like, oh, we have to re-record this. I can't cry on video. But it's just things like that don't cost money.
Right.
And they go so far to building the brand. And I know one of your key points, which I love, is companies need to take a marketing approach. The same skills they use for marketing their business to customers, they need to transfer those skills into how they attract, retain, and sometimes sever, their employees. And so, so I just think that's just a free thing to do. And, I've never seen a lawsuit brought upon someone who did something nice. Right? Or people who are treated with dignity. And so, so that's something to think about. Okay. What's that last point?
All right. So, so we're at a point where you've had to go through some layoffs. Now you have to think about the team that's left because they are impacted, right? And hopefully if you've taken the steps of doing a strategic planning session, you are already one step ahead of knowing, okay, this is the remaining team. This is how the duties get reassigned. This is who picks up more work because it's going to impact them. So number one, make sure when you've gone through this process, and I've seen business owners and CEOs do this, they make the layoff process about them. And it's not about them. Right? It's about your employees. So don't make boo-hoo, it's about me, because that's not going to garner you any respect. Yeah, nobody cares.
No
You make 12 times or 50 times what we make. you're the CEO. I really don't care about your problems. And you
And you
need to
got this
just
golden parachute if you don't own the company. So yeah, cry me a river. Yeah.
exactly. So don't make it about you because it's not. But you also need to think about how your employees are feeling after that. And the one thing I always recommend is after you've made a downsizing of any size, you immediately call a town hall, whether it's just with your department, whole company, whatever it is. But you need to talk to those employees and let them know this has happened. These team members are no longer with us. And make sure that they understand that you, as the CEO, business owner, appreciate the impact that it's made. And what you're going to have to deal with now is fear, because once those layoffs start and they see that they're starting to happen, a fear kicks into motion. Am I next? How am I going to survive this? Do I need to start looking for a job? And so understand there's now a fear, regardless of how healthy your culture is, they're going to be afraid.
Yep.
And you're going to have to balance reassuring them to some level without overpromising, right? I've gone through situations where we've had to downsize teams, and the question I always get is my job safe? The last thing you should ever say is, yes, it is, because you can never promise that.
Or is there another round, right? You can't say no to that because you don't know.
Exactly. So you have to give them enough balances so that they can get past the fear or work through it and tell them, look, it's okay to be fearful. I'm nervous too, right? We've got to fix the problems we have, or we are all out of a job, myself included. So here's what's happening. Here's how we're going to continue working to fix it. Let's put our heads down. Let's get back to work, and let's do our best to make sure there are no more layoffs. So I really encourage the town hall or the meeting of some sort so that you can deal with the team, manage the fear, get them focused, and get them back working on the mission.
I also think it's super important to have that same type of conversation, not in a town hall, with your key customers.
Great point.
They are going to know, and they're going to hear it from people who are terrified.
Right.
Right. And I think because as a customer, if you are supplying me critical services and or products that I run my business with, I'm gonna be like, okay, should I really think about diversifying now? Right? What is my plan B if you can't get yourself out of this?
Right.
And I think having those standard talking points that you can have as the CEO or as a senior leader on the sales team, depending on how this organization is structured, is incredibly important. Because you do not want to lose the hearts and minds of your customers as well.
Right. Because that's just going to compound your problems with revenue. So
Yeah,
it's a really good point. Yep.
absolutely.
And
So, yeah,
you probably even want to have the messaging that how you're going to deal with your customers done in your strategic planning session.
absolutely. No
So,
question, right?
yeah.
And I think from a planning perspective as well, so many times I have seen people on the RIF list that are key elements to succession planning.
Right.
It's just like, wait a minute, right? This doesn't make any sense. And I think it's a good time as you're trying to figure out, okay, if you do have to do a reduction in force, to really figure out like what talent is going to help you get out of this
Get out of
mess
this.
and move forward the future. Because too often we've got the right people in the wrong roles.
Yep.
Right. And then it might be a stretch role for them where they're just trying to learn their way, or perhaps their superpowers are in an area where that particular role does not allow them to use it on a regular basis.
Right.
And you're crushing your company's success opportunities if you are severing the wrong people.
Right. It's a great point.
Knowing that and teaching your leaders how to think that way, I think is essential, right? We don't spend enough time helping our leaders understand the navigation behind this. And, without training, without support, without communication, they're going to screw this up.
For sure.
Because it's uncomfortable. And let's hope they don't have to do it very often. So they're inexperienced,
Right.
and so I think doubling down on preparing our leaders for this, and this is going to bring out the elephant in the room. So I've orchestrated many layoffs. I have been on the other side of many layoffs. And so I know how the game is played. And it is when the notification happens, it is so sterile, right? The leader, you get this random meeting invitation on your calendar.
And automatically what
right,
it
you
is.
just know. And so you go into the room and you see your boss and your HR sitting there and you're like, ah, shit. It's like, okay.
It's coming.
Right. And then your boss reads a paragraph, doesn't make eye contact, and is asked to leave the room. And then HR runs through their stuff. Meanwhile, you're spinning a million miles an hour and you get perp walked out the building. And this happens all the time. And this is the standard way to do this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is, this is industry standard on how we, eliminate people in a reduction. Now, termination for cause is a different story. I'm talking about people
Right.
who have run through fire for you and are just a victim of the company's performance. And, we say, well, we have to manage our legal risks. We have to manage our HR risks, and we have to keep our people safe. And all of those things I completely agree with, because I've had death threats. Like, I know how this goes.
Right.
And that freaks people out, by the way. So please don't do it, even in jest.
Right.
It
Agreed.
really does freak everybody out. But I also think it's cowardly. I think to hide behind legal HR
Hmm.
and those types of things, I just think it's a cowardly move. And if we applied the same level of risk aversion to our physical operations, we would never open the doors on a rainy day because someone might slip and fall. Right? So what's the balance? Where do you see that balance in terms of being able to protect the safety and the stability of the organization, but still treating people like human beings and appreciating the contributions that they've been able to make? Where's that balance?
I think the balance, as we've mentioned, it lies in the training, right? Because unfortunately, when I've, I've run 50-person teams before. So I've had a lot of people reporting to me, just like you. And you take the good with the bad. So, as a leader, your team should get the wins, you take the brunt of the losses. And unfortunately, a lot of, like you said, low EQ leaders, when it comes to those hard conversations, they don't want to have them. So they hide behind HR, which is then in turn makes HR the bad cop always.
Always.
So I really think it comes down to training our leaders to be willing to have those hard conversations and just be honest with the team. Because yeah, you shouldn't be letting somebody off by text or mass email. So it's cold, right? Not especially if you've touted your company as family, right? Don't get me started on that because that's a
Oh
whole
yeah, no,
different.
totally.
Yeah, I can't imagine
We're
putting my kid on a.
for another episode, right?
I'd
So
love to put my kid on a PIP. So
I actually I've put my daughter on a performance plan though, a pay for performance plan.
there
So
you
when she was
go.
in college, just non sequitur, she was in college, I paid for A's and B's, we split the cost of C's, and she paid for anything less than that. So anyway, but moving on, sorry.
That's a
I digress.
brilliant plan.
Yeah,
So balancing it, you still, like you said, and I agree, you still have to have HR and legal covered. But I really think that the leaders, if somebody reports to you, you need to be the one to have the hard conversation with them and have that conversation and wrap it up. And that's fine. HR can do the paperwork, but that's all they should have to do.
yeah.
Right. You should
All
be
through
able to
the
sit down with them.
right, yeah.
Look, I'm so, this is what we're doing. This is where we're headed. How can I help? We're going to try and help you with this, and this.
Well, and it's interesting because you started to say, I'm sorry. And I remember HR like prohibiting us from apologizing. Like, you can't say you're sorry because that's an admission of guilt. I'm like, we're firing these people. Like,
The guilt of what? That we screwed up as a company?
I'm like, what?
I
So
got news for you. The employer already knows we screwed up.
like the note has been, received. And like, so you couldn't say you were sorry. You couldn't thank them for the good work that they did. Like, you're really just isolated to, that one paragraph and nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
And it has leaders freaked out to try, to try and reach out to them after they've been, after they left the building. And
And
I just, it's just so strange to me.
it's unfortunate because we have made this country so litigious when it comes to wage and hour and labor law.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of the fear of litigation, we've gone too far to one side in trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've taken out the human element to it. And more than not, if you treat people with respect and treating them like a human, you can navigate through it. A lot of people actually understand, right?
Yeah.
They get it. And so there's ways to diffuse that in the conversation. So
yeah. I mean, the last time I was ripped, which actually led to this company. So, blessing in disguise, it's like, okay, who knew that, but when I had just gotten done orchestrating a very large rift for my department, I didn't know I was the last one on the list. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Nice little plot twist there. But when you looked at it, I was very expensive. And I was able, by me going, it saved so many other jobs. And I'm like,
right.
I'm good with that. Like, I get it. I don't like it, but I get
Yeah.
it.
But you understood it.
Yeah. And I think you're right. People do understand, especially if you start with that transparency piece that you opened with,
Mm-hmm.
to where people have seen it coming and they've heard it. right?
Right.
And so, and for employees that hear that, read the room, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
protect yourself, have a plan B.
Exactly.
Because even the best people on a team don't always make it.
Right.
And sometimes it's just, it doesn't really matter how good you are. It's just the
We can
nature.
always end up on a list.
Absolutely, right? Present company included.
Hmm.
All right, any other parting words for leaders that are trying to navigate this? This has been a fantastic conversation. Just so excited about all the knowledge bombs that you dropped to our community today. So what are your parting words, my dear?
My parting words are, just don't make stupid decisions. A lot of times we get in these situations because we lose focus and we start making decisions that are not aligned with the overall strategy of our business,
Yeah.
and we start spending way too much and we get overconfident. So really, think through all of your decisions and how many consequences could flow from it, because when you start making decisions that aren't in alignment with your core values of your business, that's when your business starts going off the rails. So
Mic drop there. That is perfect. Okay. Now you have a new line of business that you've started. And so I would love for you to share that with our community as well, because I'm so excited to hear that you are branching out.
well, as you and I discussed, I'm not an HR person by trade or training. Yes, I run an HR management firm and I can hire great people to help give good HR support to businesses. But what I really enjoy is the operations and the business side of things, right? The entire flywheel, sales, marketing, the whole engine that makes a business work. So I have launched a business coaching practice, and that is officially live. I've got an ebook, the 6 common mistakes that I see business owners making, and the 6 silver bullets to fix it. So I do have a free ebook for anybody that wants it.
So that
Uh,
link will be in the show notes. So they'll be
Thank you.
available for everyone. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. I also have a business scorecard on our website, which will help you figure out where you've got some gaps in your business. And I'm here to work with business CEOs and business owners and founders that are looking to take their business all the way through to what we call the freedom stage, where they have built a great team. They are able to start focusing on how to grow that business. They're not having to run it day to day, and potentially even work towards an exit. So yeah, I'm excited.
Excellent. So if you are in Brian's sweet spot, run, don't walk for his guidance, because it is liquid gold all the time. So Brian, thanks so much for spending some time with me today. And I know everyone's just going to have a lot of action items from this good conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate it.